What's going on, everyone? Happy Friday to everyone here, and welcome to a special episode here on Good Mic Work Commentaries. Today happens to be the 20-year anniversary of the final ever WCW Nitro on TNT, and just 3 days after the buyout of WCW from Vince McMahon purchasing the company, and the business changing, many people say, not for the better ever since then. And this is a pretty big day in history because my memories of this are off the charts. I remember everything about this time period. I lived it. I breathed it. I was there for all of it. I watched it live on TV every week as it unfolded, and all of this I experienced that night, and it was pretty surreal and pretty crazy night in wrestling, and it's one that really did change everything, completely changed the game. So I thought it would be fun to come up here on the 20th anniversary prior to SmackDown. SmackDown airs for us here in about 2 hours, so I figured that was enough time to come up on YouTube and kind of relive this day and relive, everything leading up to this. And, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about what happened after this as well, and how we can point, where the business is today. We can point all of that directly back to this moment and the buyout of WCW, because it was a pretty crazy thing that happened, and it was something that in my mind I never thought would happen, and it was so damn surreal. You're probably going to hear me say that word a lot because it's really the only word I can think of to fucking describe this. Because it really was. For those of us that are old enough to remember this and live through it and remember how intense this war was, and a lot of us were picking sides at that time, for this to happen, it was just, it's just mind-blowing. The watermark at the end of the show with the copyright WCW that's over top of a Monday Night Raw episode. It was like, what the fuck? What kind of universe am I in here? So it was a big deal, and we're going to kind of unpack it all here, talk about what led up to it, the buyout, and who, made the Bischoff, nearly buying the company, and the downfall of WCW and what happened to them once the NWO kind of tapered off and WWE took over in the ratings and went with Austin and Vince, and how everything changed, and it was just a downhill spiral for WCW, not only creatively but also internally, with Ted Turner, losing control and the AOL Time Warner merger and all that stuff that all factored in to the demise of WCW and what it led to on this very strange and bizarre kind of final night. It wasn't even in an arena. It was at the beach. It was in Panama City, Florida, like at a resort. Boardwalk Beach Resort, I think it was called. And they had done a lot of beach shows. It was kind of like their theme a lot on Nitro. They did Nitro parties and things like that, but they would always do these beach shows. But for this one to be the final show, so poorly lit, nobody was on the show. No legends showed up except for Flair and Sting. And it had weird camera angles. It just didn't look like, Nitro didn't resemble what it did anyway by this point, but having it in an arena and just having like a little bit more WCW-ish of a feel, I wish, would have been the case for this final show. But it was just very strange feeling, weird watching it that night. And I recorded, Raw every week back in these days. And on my recording, my original home copied recording, you can see me flipping back and forth during the simulcast. Vince to WCW, Vince to WCW. It was crazy. It was quite the night. And anyway, I'll try to share some of you my memories of it and what I experienced going through all that. Hopefully, I can be heard. All right, we're looking good there. I am looking for something else. I seem to have lost it. Anyway, not a big deal. I want to say hello to everybody in the chat who's here and was here waiting for me. Appreciate you guys being here with me on this Friday afternoon. I've got the night off, so I figured I would do this during the day. I'd watch SmackDown tonight. We're going to be up here tomorrow for the Winged Eagle podcast. That's going to be a lot of fun. And on Sunday, I've got a big watch-along plan, so stay tuned for that as well. The link is already up on my channel. I should have posted it in the description, but I forgot. But you can go right to my channel right now and find it. This Sunday, we're going to do a watch-along of WrestleMania 6. Now, I'm really enjoying doing these watch-alongs, but there's going to be a problem. We're going to talk about this tomorrow on the podcast, but with WWE transferring all of its content to Peacock now, they're going to go through and edit everything here. They're going to go through and edit all of the content, all, 20,000 hours or whatever the hell it is of WWE content that's going to be on Peacock, and they're going to take out some of the undesirable things, some of the racist things, shit like that. They've already made some edits, and one of those early edits that they have made is on the very show we're doing. WrestleMania 6 on Sunday. But you know what? That's not going to deter us. We wanted to do this one. We're going to do it, and I've created a solution. So if you are watching outside of the United States on the WWE Network, you're going to have your own separate timer, and I'm going to set it up and give you instructions on what to do just to fast forward through the Roddy Piper versus Bad News Brown match, because he's painted half himself black, and WWE or Peacock just edited that entire situation out. His promo, the match, and everything. So I've got it set up in a way that no matter which one you're watching on, Peacock or WWE Network, you will be able to follow along on Sunday. So that'll be up Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and you can translate that to wherever you live in the world. So keep that in mind for Sunday. It's going to be fun, and then day after that, we're up here for the Raw review. So 4 consecutive days of streaming starts right now. I think that's all I have to tell you guys about in terms of scheduling, but if you want to hang out and have another good, fun night of wrestling on Sunday, that's going to be fun. WrestleMania 6 was a big deal, and much like the show we're going to talk about here, with all of my personal memories of them, I'm going to have a lot to share with you about WrestleMania 6 as well, because I watched it on pay-per-view in my living room with my parents and my sisters and a couple of neighbors that came over and, you know, watched that whole deal, and it was very surreal. Much like this, it was probably one of the top 5 to 10 moments in my mind as a wrestling fan that was really like, holy shit. Just like I didn't see WCW and WWE ever working together or coming together as one, I certainly never saw anybody beat Hulk Hogan clean at WrestleMania either. So those are 2 really big moments in my life in terms of being a wrestling fan. So it'll be fun to watch that on Sunday. But like I said, with this show, pretty nuts what went on here. We'll be getting into it in a minute. Let me just say hello to everybody else. Legend Killer and Melissa and Big J and Steven, Dre, Martin, Mr. Tim, Filipino or Filipino, Do Surf. Deshaun is back and Raymond Fran. George Morris is here with a $5 drop. Hey, Greg, how are you doing? Peacock cut out the entire Roddy Piper and Brown match. Yeah, I just talked about that. And promo, you are still doing a watch-along now, WWE Network worse. Yeah, so far, this sucks with Peacock, and it sucks because if you do want to do something like a watch-along here, it's going to make it hard for people that are watching outside the U.S. who still have the regular WWE Network, and all this shit is not edited in there. So, you know, it sucks for the YouTube channel. I want to do more watch-along, so we're just going to have to try to seek out shows that haven't been edited. You know, maybe I can turn to you guys for that. Give me some suggestions of pay-per-views, of any show you'd like to see me review, that there's a pretty good chance they're not going to edit out. Like, there's nothing too crazy in it. So if you guys can find examples of that, we'll do that and try to make it as easy as possible to do future watch-alongs. But we're going to test out how this system works on Sunday, and I think I've got it figured out. So Sunday's going to be fun on the channel regardless of the Peacock's dumbass editing issues. But yeah, that's going to be a problem. That's going to create a little bit of an obstacle for us here and there on the channel. And it created an obstacle for me today. Before I went live here, I wanted to take a look at a couple of things on Raw, on the rival or the Go Home Raw of WrestleMania 17 that went head-to-head with Nitro on this night, just to kind of refresh my memory. And it is off the network as of now. It says it directed me to go to Peacock, but Peacock doesn't have all the Monday Night Raws. So you can't even see, I don't think you can see either one of these shows right now on Peacock. I don't think they're up there yet. They've got some seasons of Raw, but they don't have 2001 up there yet. So, and I had this episode of Nitro on the WWE Network last night, and it was working fine. Now, so it must have happened overnight that they've now blocked you from watching at least the Raws and Nitros, I think, on the network, and they're now making you go to Peacock, but they're not on Peacock yet. So I'm starting to be on the bandwagon of Barry and some of these others that are not too thrilled with this Peacock transfer so far. Obviously, it's going to take some time, but man, right now they are really making things difficult. And if they're going to edit the shit out of all of this content, it's really going to suck. I kind of just wish the network would have stayed the way it was. But anyway, thanks again, George Morris, for that. There's Barry with 5. Oh, you're going to talk about Peacock. Perfect. Peacock has screwed every wrestling fan in the U.S. Please don't support them. We need to make our voice heard and fight this somehow. Yeah, they got us by the fucking nuts, man. I agree with you completely, but it's not even worth me not supporting them. I have to. I got to watch this shit. I got to do YouTube. So, unfortunately, they're going to be able to steal my $10 a month. Unfortunately, not much I can do about that. But I do, even though I hate the Peacock shit so far, let's at least just wait till all the shit gets over there and try to judge it then. But yeah, there hasn't been anybody singing the praises of the Peacock transfer so far. And I'm starting to see why, because it's pretty messed up. Also good to see JL and K-Dog's Kennel, Lambo, Legend Killer, Anonymous 1, Roger AJ. We got Sunnyman Ratnick, Ernie Garcia is here, and Deshaun Robinson with a $2 chat. Peacock is run by the right to censor. It is, and especially if they've just now started going through all this content, there's going to be just constant edits being made left and right here. We're never going to get on the other side of it. It's going to suck. So yeah, kind of sucks. Wish the network would have stayed where it was. Vince always had this vision. You know, years and years ago, he envisioned having a WWE network. He finally realized that vision, but by the time he realized it, that vision was almost like obsolete. And once he realized there's money to be made by selling off your rights to your content to other platforms and shit, holy crap, that's a complete game changer. So just as Vince accomplished that dream that he probably had since the 80s of having the WWE's own network, he now realized there's more money to be made selling it elsewhere. So yeah, it's a different game now, man. I'd love to go back to the days of 1990, well, maybe not 1995, but basically how things were run. You know, just kind of three people sitting around Vince's pool writing out TV for the next few months. Much simpler, man. Shit is so crazy. But you're going to find out how crazy as we talk about this WCW purchase by WWE when they were starting to, the tires or the wheels were starting to come off, and they were basically really being threatened here. And with all the different mergers and the acquisitions and changes in management and stuff, eventually, you know, the company never really wanted anything to do with wrestling. So that's when the sales started talking, and the rumors of the sales started talking, and the potential buyers and Eric Bischoff stepping in. I remember as a fan, you know, this is back in the hotline days. I would call a lot of hotlines. I even ran one of my own, as crazy as that sounds. And the talk was that it was going to be sold, and a lot of people had pegged Bischoff for this. He formulated a group of investors and everything. He put an offer together and everything. But then when the TV deal fell through, that kind of made the whole deal pointless, because you need the TV in order for the company to succeed and make money and shit like that. So everything fell through, and then Vince swooped right in, picked it up from anywhere from $2 to $4 million, depending on what report you read, which is just an insanely small amount of money just to pick up the tape library and the rights and all of that, because now they can use that, and they would go on a DVD releasing spree over the next 10 or 15 years, just really utilizing a lot of this content well. It was part of the reason why the WWE Network was even developed to begin with, because now they have all this content that they can use. And once that buyout happened, it changed all of that. Remember back in the early days, like on your cable systems, you would have that WWE 24/7. They would start doing exclusive content there. A lot of that shit was on demand. I think you had to pay for it. And they were starting to make use of all of this. That show Confidential, they used to be on USA, which was a great show. I remember that started about a year after the buyout, and they were like, holy shit, we have so many stories to tell now. We have all this WCW footage, and we can start to rewrite history really to look in our favor, to make it look like we really conquered this big, mighty giant and stuff. So, that's kind of where they started, kind of telling their own tale of how all this went down. And it was, and it also eliminated competition, which is another thing we're going to talk a great deal about today, about how this was a pretty history-making show, and I had a whole bunch of different combinations of emotions in me as I watched this. But really, when you look back, it's one of the darkest days ever, because after this, where'd the competition go? For me, as a fan, I remember it was like an immediate drop-off. The invasion, right off the bat, failed. By then, you're now into 2002. Hogan and the NWO are in there, and that's kind of weird. WWF changes names to WWE, and then Austin walks out. Rock is no longer there anymore. And shit was just getting weird. It was just starting to change. The business felt different. They would still remain hot for the next few years for the most part. But, as a fan, for me, everything kind of ended right around here. I have pretty full memories, maybe through 2003. After that, I can just really feel this like tapering off to me, where it felt like a lot of the same shit every week. And I've had that feeling really for the last, 15 or so years. It all started with this damn night. And I'd do anything. I'd give anything to go back to Raw versus Nitro. I'd do anything to go back to those for one night, watch those two shows, because I had a pretty big dog in the fight. I was a Federation guy. I was WWF. I did watch WCW. I liked a lot of the talent there. I was always a fan of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and guys like that. I liked the NWO. I thought they had a winning idea there, and they were beating the shit out of WWE, which I hated. And I would justify things in my mind. I would insist to myself that WWE had the far better show. And they did during a lot of WCW's 83-week victories. But they didn't always. And a lot of times I, probably naively thought that WWE really had the better talent when WCW had everything. It was how they were putting it all together that kind of sucked. WWE was more, storyline driven. You get a little bit more invested in these angles. Shit seemed to be shuffled around a lot. In WCW, it seems a lot like WWE is now, where shit's just been thrown together on the cuff, random tag team matches, random angles, overbooked matches, and, just pointless shit, rematches and things like that. But they really had so much talent, and Bischoff was smart enough to grab the Cruiserweights and grab all the guys from Mexico and Japan and put together this fabulous undercard of just great workers that was a perfect balance to the NWO on the marquee. So they were doing a lot of stuff right, and because they had the talent there, but really internally they didn't have it like together as WWE thought, or I thought did. especially when you look at stuff like the USA Canada angle and the rise of Steve Austin and the Bret Hart Foundation stuff. All of that was when they were getting their asses kicked in the ratings, but those shows were really good and they were well put together and they were well structured. And WWE was doing, from that standpoint, I thought they were making up for the fact that they didn't have quite the talent roster and, quite frankly, the name and the legends that WCW did, because Hogan was there and Savage, and then Hall and Nash left. I've mentioned this before, how I felt like around 96, I felt like both companies kind of swapped rosters. Because if you look in WCW in 96 when Hall and Nash left, you already had all the 80s stars there, like Hogan and Duggan and Savage and Earthquake and Bossman and Jimmy Hart. And all these guys that were in WWF, they were there. Now you start adding 90s stars. Nash, Hall, DiBiase came in, X-Pac, fucking Crush. Everybody from WWE started going over there, and WWF acquired a lot of former WCW talent. Johnny B. Bad, Cactus Jack, Vader, Dustin Rhodes. And I was like, man, the companies really felt like WWE had WCW's like 1992 roster. It really felt like that. So it was an interesting time how the companies kind of traded things off and how, one was hotter or whatever. But at the time, WCW had the bigger names. They had the more recognizable names. WWE just had to kind of run on Taker, Shawn, Brett. And that was like kind of it, in terms of their real big top tier talent. So they had to make all those guys. And that's when Austin was born and The Rock. And then you had Triple H come out of that. Mick Foley got on the map. Edge and Christian and Dudley's Kurt Angle came in. And, in the course of about 2 years there was a complete annihilation. WWE was wiping the fucking floor with these guys, and it was quite the turnaround. But still, it was fun every week, and it made both companies better. And it really just, when WWE's had its back against the wall, we've seen the type of shit they can do when they really kind of band together and fight for their lives, sort of. And it made the best wrestling TV we've ever seen. And man, when we sit here on my Raw review, and we pretty much never have too many good things to say about WWE Raw. I sit here and make my notes for this shit every week, this 3-hour show, and it's absolute torture 90% of the time. I want it to be over. I don't know why I do this to myself. I really enjoy streaming and talking to you guys. I'm not a masochist, I swear, but man, to sit through 3 hours of Raw, 3 hours of nonsense rematches, stupid, pointless fucking shit every week, it really makes me yearn for these times to go back when when Mondays was a destination. Monday was the place to be. To this day, it's been a primary part of my life. I have had Mondays off. I have made it possible to have Mondays off from whatever job I've had for like 25 years. I just love to be off Mondays. Mondays is wrestling night. Mondays is my day off. My days to get relaxed and get shit done, hang out and watch wrestling. And I still have that tradition to this day, even though it was much more fun 25 years ago, 23 years ago, 22 years ago, when, shit was so hot and man, wrestling was just crazy. And I'd give anything to have a day of it back. That's for sure, especially with what goes on now. But anyway, before we jump into the actual final episode of Nitro and talk about the actual results, just a little bit of backstory, like we've been talking about and rambling on about here. WCW, they began Nitro on September 4th, I believe, 1995. In the Mall of America. It's very interesting how these two shows mirrored each other a little bit. Both weird-ass locations. They both looked a little bit strange, and both shows had a Ric Flair versus Sting match on it. I thought that was really cool that they kind of bookend the two Monday Nitros. It would have been cool, though, if I don't think on the first Nitro that Sting and Flair opened. I think that was Pillman and Liger, I believe. But it would have been cool if they opened the first Nitro and closed the last one. That would have been pretty cool. Either way, to have them both on the show, I thought was pretty awesome. But once Hall and Nash came over, formed the NWO, they were off and running 83 weeks in a row. Victory in the ratings until right after WrestleMania 14 when they did the big Austin-Vince segment, and Austin had his arm tied behind his back, and Vince slapped him, and they took over. And that's when I was going into shows. I was actually at the next pay-per-view, Unforgiven 98, to see the Dude Love Austin match and Vince getting involved in that and the Inferno match and all that stuff. And they were finally now in the lead, and they had taken over, and they really wouldn't relinquish it. I think they passed a ratings victory back to WCW here or there in 98, but for the most part, there was no stopping them, and they just started kicking their ass. And then TBS merged with Time Warner, and then in 2001, AOL, America Online, bought Time Warner, and they became AOL Time Warner. So all of these management changes and these sellings basically booted Ted Turner out of power. He no longer had the ability to just keep the wrestling going because he liked it, which is pretty much why he always had a loyalty to that wrestling and he kept it around. But, you know, the new people in charge, they didn't want anything to do with wrestling. They didn't like it. They thumbed their nose at it and they basically wanted to get rid of it. And they also saw all of these contracts that were being paid out and they just wanted to get rid of this thing. So that's when rumors of the sale started happening. I remember listening to that on the hotlines and reading that in the dirt sheets and shit like that. Everybody was talking about WCW potentially selling, and at the time it felt like it was going to be Bischoff. He was still appearing on the show, even at the week before's Nitro. Before the final Nitro, he did that phone interview where he announced the following week is going to be the Night of Champions. He invited all the past stars to show up. They were making it seem like it was going to be a big deal. Imagine if it was. Imagine if Goldberg was there and Hogan and anybody else that was still kind of under contract came in, but nobody except Sting was there and Flair. You saw no Hogan, no Goldberg, no Nash, no Hall, no Brett, nobody like that. So it just sucked completely. So imagine if that would have all happened and Bischoff was going to buy the company and then all the legends did show up and it was kind of like a rebirth for WCW, but it went in the complete opposite direction in like 5 days' time, because then by, I believe, March 23rd, that's when the sale took place, because Bischoff's told the story a bunch of times. Once they lost the TV deal, it wasn't worth purchasing the company, and it made it pretty much worthless, at least in their eyes. But WWE, you know, they can have a lot of use for the, you know, the lights, the intellectual property rights and the tape library and all that shit. They can put that to good use, and they can use that in storylines, and it's very valuable to them. And they came in and swooped that up for so fucking cheap. You know, especially when you think about now, man, any wrestler could buy that. I think Chris Jericho even said in the one of the DVDs about this, he said, you know, for what Vince bought, he goes, I could have bought it. So anybody could have bought this. So WWE basically acquired it, swallowed them up, and that was about 2 or 3 days before the final Nitro that was also head-to-head with Monday Night Raw. That was also the go-home show to the biggest WrestleMania in that company's history up until that point. Well, arguably. I suppose nothing's going to top 3, but at least in those modern times, having that big main event, hottest time in the business, Austin Rock, 2 biggest stars, you know, potentially ever, head-to-head main event. They had all of that going on, and it was a pretty stacked card. We did a watch-along of that just a couple of weeks ago if you want to check it out on my channel. Fun fucking night. Shane versus Vince, Taker and Triple H, the big TLC match, Austin and Rock. So much good stuff on that show. And then you add all of this to it, the purchase of WCW, and the fans just, you know, for a fan like me at my age, you know, who at this point is 25 years old, I am blown away by this development. And I don't even, my mind couldn't even really grasp what's going to happen. What are they going to do? Holy shit. We, as fans, those of us, and for those of you who were old enough to remember this, you know, back me up here if you agree. I feel like all of us felt like WCW was going to live on. I felt like they were going, once they did the Shane angle, which we'll talk about, that they were going to continue on. And they were going to try to secure a TV deal. There was rumors of them even turning Raw into WCW show, which I think would have sucked, or giving WCW the Raw time slot, which I remember hearing that rumor and hating that. I was all for them trying to utilize WCW, but they sucked at that point. It was like a terrible product with, you know, not really much going on the roster, and shit just sucked. To give them that hot Monday Night Raw time slot with all those big stars competing on it every week, Austin, Rock, Taker, Kane, all those guys, and you're going to replace it with fucking 3 Count and Sean Stasiak, get the fuck out of here. So I did not like that idea at all, but I did like the idea of them trying to rebrand WCW and basically relaunch it with a new identity. But even back then, even in 2001, the way my mind was thinking, I was like, you know, even if they do that and they give it a separate night, a separate show, they actually do maybe not only in kayfabe but legit, they put Shane in charge of it, it's still going to be a WWE produced show. And like we see that now, how there's very little difference between Raw and SmackDown. I think eventually, and when ECW relaunched, same thing. I think if they would have done this here, it would have eventually gotten to the point where the 2 shows just looked the fucking same. And they would not have been able to resist the urge to swap. You know how the Invasion got so crazy, and you had Kurt Angle joining the Alliance and stuff, and, you know, and then joining back with WWE, Austin joining the Alliance, Regal joining the, I mean, all this shit that was going on was so crazy and like kind of overdone and overbooked. They would have fucked it up so bad. It would have been, you know, as soon as WCW's ratings weren't very good, Kane would show up or something. And yeah, that might be cool. It wouldn't have had the same impact as if it was a company that was being owned by a completely separate entity. Eventually, I think it probably would have failed. I still would have liked to see them try, but a lot of fans believe that, oh, they should have given it a shot, and I do think they should have given it a shot. But I also think, based on what we know of WWE now and how they operate and do things, they would have fucked that up. 100%. They would have fucked it up. Yeah, it would have been, I mean, it might have still been kind of cool. I'm sure it would have provided us great matches, great rivalries, and all of that, but this like feeling that it's really two separate brands. You can call it WCW all you want. If you know WWE owns it, you know, you're not going to really truly believe it the way you would, you know, a little bit earlier on when, you know, backstage news, the internet wasn't in full swing and not everybody knew about Hall and Nash. Most people did, but casual viewers did not. So when they show up on Nitro and say they're going to start a war, you're like, holy shit. Pants shitting moment in wrestling. And, you know, this was one of those too. So I think, you know, had they done the relaunch, it probably wouldn't have, you know, worked out. But anyway, like I said, they bought the company around, I think the 23rd, maybe the 24th of March. A couple days later, you have the final ever WCW Nitro. And this was in Panama City Beach, Florida. And they sent, I believe, Bruce Pritchard, Gerald Briscoe, and somebody else. Pritchard, Briscoe, and Shane went down to Nitro. And how weird do you think that must have been? For them to walk in there. I mean, I would have brought some more. I mean, Briscoe's tough. Nobody's going to fuck with him. But, man, I would have brought a little bit more, like, muscle with me. I don't know. You might get some disgruntled people. Plus, on the other TV, you got Vince on Raw shitting on WCW throughout the entire episode of not only Nitro, but Raw as well, which we'll talk about here in a minute, which was pretty hilarious and, you know, pretty head-scratching at the same time. But, man, what a weird environment. What a weird environment. If I was talent there, I wouldn't even know, you know, what to think. And a lot of them didn't. There's been many documentaries done on this. There's been many little different pieces they've done on TV throughout the years and DVDs and all this shit. There's a lot of talent that commented that they didn't know what to make of it when Pritchard was there and Shane was there. They didn't know if they were going to have a job or whatever. So I think that night WWE had an idea and did talk to a few people, and maybe they, I forgot how it went, but I think, you know, you had the option to take the buyout or sign with WWE. And there were some people there that I think they knew were going to be coming in. They were going to bring in. One of those was Booker T, and maybe a few other guys as well. So it was probably a weird situation for everybody there. Just so crazy. That one backstage shot we've seen of the last Nitro where they go backstage and you see Bruce Pritchard standing there with like Jimmy Hart and stuff. Like, how weird. You know, they showed up and they're like, hey, guess what? This is ours now. You do what we say, and we're directing the show. And man, oh man, crazy. Anyway, in terms of what went head-to-head with Nitro on the go-home Mania show for Raw, they had the big, on Raw was the part where you had Vince looking at the two TV sets. He had WWF Raw and then WCW Nitro, and they showed Jeff Jarrett. I think Lex Luger is there as well, or that might have been another segment. But I know Jarrett was there in the beginning, and that's when Vince says, you know, Jeff Jarrett likes to spell his name J-A-R-R-E-E or E-T-T. Well, now we're going to spell it a different way. He goes double G. Double O, double N, double E. What the fuck is that? Gagoni? Gone. And he basically fires Jeff Jarrett right there on national TV. Fucking crazy. So crazy. I mean, Jeff Jarrett had heat. He did that deal. He held them up for money that was owed to him, but he said he wasn't going to drop that belt to China unless they paid him. They did. And Vince had bad feelings about that. He also had some harsh words for Lex Luger, because we all know what Lex Luger did to kick off this whole war, showing up on the first ever Nitro. He basically fired them both right there on Raw. Pretty funny. The card was weird. You had Taz beating Val Venus in a lumberjack match. William Regal beat Crash Holly via DQ. Chris Benoit and the Hardy Boys beat Edge, Christian, and Kurt Angle in a six-man. It's some pretty fucking impressive talent in that match right there. X-Pac beat Test with Eddie Guerrero as the special referee. Big Show over Chris Jericho. And in the tag team main event, The Rock and Austin, two guys. See how long they've been doing this? Wasn't I just complaining about this, you know, last week in WWE, that whenever they have two kind of baby faces going into a big pay-per-view match, they always have to team them together. Always. They never have another idea. Anyway, Rock and Austin taking on Undertaker and Kane in the main event. And to me, that right there was just the epitome of the difference in the two companies, especially when you're going to hear what some of these results are on the final Nitro, how the tide had turned around that time. When you looked at Nitro, you know, I'd say 60 to 70% of the talent are unrecognizable to the 1995 or 1996 wrestling eye. These are all new names. A lot of them are young stars and up-and-coming stars, or maybe cast-offs of WWE. The big name people were just not present on the show. No more Savage, no more Hogan, Hall, Nash, Goldberg wasn't there. Nobody was there. Everything that made WCW so huge wasn't there. So it was, yeah, and on the WWE side, you have this main event of this mega main event WrestleMania of Austin and Rock teaming up against, Undertaker, who's basically the godfather of the company, and Kane, who's a damn stud. By the way, congrats to Kane, who was just announced, I think, yesterday or the day before, will be going into the 2021 Hall of Fame class. That is perfect. Not a better candidate, not a more deserving candidate than Kane. And he, in this match here, he was just such a badass. 2000 and 2001 Kane were probably his best years here. But when you look at a main event like this in a packed house in Cleveland, that Gund Arena has been home to some pretty amazing fucking Monday Night Raws and moments. There was a lot of big shows that took place there. That big Austin Kane match after King of the Ring 98 was in that arena as well when Austin beat him for the title. It's always just been a hot crowd, and they've always been they've been able to experience some pretty great moments in that building. And this was the whole final Nitro night and simulcast with Raw. So all that was going on, packed house, 20,000 people there, jacked crowd. And then you compare that to what's going on Nitro. I don't know, 1,200 people in the audience, empty bleachers in the background, dimly lit. It's just a completely different. It was a perfect illustration, basically, of where the two companies were at. One looked minor league and bush league, and the other looked like it was, the pinnacle of where you can be, and that's exactly what it was. It really was. So quite the difference there. The finish of that main event, by the way, Triple H, a little teaser to what would happen after WrestleMania with the two-man power trip. But prior to that, when Austin's still a babyface, Triple H hits the ring. He's going to face Taker at WrestleMania, whacks him with a chair. Austin then just covers Taker for the win. And just a little foreshadowing there that Austin would start taking the cheap way out pretty soon after that following Sunday's show. And then the cool spot at the end, Austin opens up like 4 cans of beer. He drinks them, turns around, Rock hits him with a stunner, puts the beer next to his head, and that classic line by Paul Heyman, how personal does this get? Raw was really cooking at that time, and that should have been the way the show went off the air. It probably was scheduled to go off the air that way prior to the buyout, but then after that was when Vince came out and did the big promo in the ring. So anyway, there's your setup. There's your backstory. That's kind of my thoughts on WCW, how they began, how they were winning, and how they ended, and how it changed wrestling. Many people say for the worst, and we kind of ran through a little bit there of what Raw had going on the other show, but completely night and day, two different companies by this point, and it would have been cool if this would have happened just a little bit earlier because, imagine if everybody would have been there. Imagine if this Nitro that we're going to talk about right now had all of those big stars that made them the winning company in 98, 99, or 97. I should say. Imagine if they were there, and imagine if they were present for the invasion that we would see in a couple of months. Man, great time. Before we get into the actual results, if you guys don't mind smashing the thumbs up button for me, hopefully we'll have, I got about 100 people in here. I guess I can live with that. Wasn't sure what you guys are really doing on Friday afternoons or Friday evenings, but we got SmackDown starting in just a little bit. Oh, Sable versus Luna was on that show as well. I tried to go up and peek at it and try to run through a couple of highlights. I have my own copy of it. I would have just had to put it in and all that. But I tried to go on the network, and then I think just as of last night, they have now blocked you from watching the Raws. They've sent you over to Peacock. But Peacock doesn't have 2001 on there yet. So I wasn't able to really go through and watch it. I just had to kind of go by memory because I remember this night well, man. Like I said, I sat on my couch, and I had already known about the buyout. I heard about it on a hotline when the sale happened. And there was so much going on. I didn't even know what to expect. I had no idea what to expect on the show. I didn't know what to watch. I didn't know which show I should watch. And I never did watch Nitro. I always watched Raw. I would switch over and flip over during commercials. But the cool thing back in the day is that TNT would replay Nitro. Nitro would have a replay every Monday, and it would come like 2 hours. They would play Nitro and it would go off the air, and then would play like a movie or something, or maybe a TV show, or like 2 hours, or maybe two or 3 hours of programming, and then they would show a Nitro replay. So it allowed me to record both shows, but most of the time I would only record Raw, and I would like usually just lay in bed, because by then it would be like midnight whenever Nitro came on. I would usually lay in bed and watch Nitro at night. That was like my Monday routine, my Monday tradition. I miss it, man. I miss it so much. But anyway, by this point, I wasn't paying much attention to WCW at all. They were pretty shitty around this time. Nothing they were doing was interesting me at all. I mean, even the previous show, they were right off the pay-per-view Greed, I think a week or two before. And the Nitro before this, that was the one with like, they had the donkey out there or something, and Dusty Rhodes and Dustin Rhodes, and Ric Flair was like kissing the donkey ass, and He was kind of a heel, and here on this night, he'd come out here and open the show as a huge babyface. They were having some really strange angles and shit that I just did not care about at all. I was not watching them. I mean, I really wasn't, especially in 2001. Hell no, late 2000, even early 2000, they were pretty much off my radar. But you would always, pay attention to them. I think the last pay-per-view I purchased, I think it was by them, I think it was in 98. I purchased Halloween Havoc 98. I can't recall purchasing a pay-per-view after that. Oh, I guess I got Starrcade. I got Starrcade with Goldberg losing, so that would have been the last one. But yeah, and then I purchased Halloween Havoc 98. Interestingly enough, about that show, I've told this story before, my pay-per-view did not shut off. I got to see the whole DDP Goldberg match. I had no idea that there was even a problem until the next day when I heard all about it on like the hotlines and shit. So I was one of the lucky ones that somehow, I remember it clicking, like the screen went black for a second, and then it came back on, and it just kept playing the match. So I was lucky. But yeah, I think after that, no pay-per-views in 99. I didn't buy any, and I certainly didn't give a rat's ass about them in 2000 either. So yeah, it was a strange time. But anyway, let's get into the final Nitro. March 26th, 2001, from Panama City Beach, Florida, on the Boardwalk Beach Resort. Like I said, this was a very strange-looking set. They had done the beach shows before. I remember Nash jumping into the water, doing a cannonball in there or whatever. They had done some beach shows, and I liked them. Even in even when they did the Disney shows in the early days of NWO, like when they just formed and they beat up the Four Horsemen and Rey Mysterio got lawn darted. Even that show, I remember, had just like a fun summertime-y feel to it. This just had an eerie feel. It was dark. It felt dark. That's all I can really, that's the best word I can use to explain the show, is it just felt dark. But, I wish they would have been in an arena and it would have been had a little bit more energy to it or whatever. Just kind of an odd location. And I think, some of the crowd responses might have been better, especially when Shane came out. If they would have been inside a building, the fans would have been shitting their pants. At a show like this, I worry that a lot of these fans that were in attendance there might not even been wrestling fans. They might have just been at the fucking resort, wandering in there or something. So I think it would have been cool to have, a more authentic wrestling fan reaction indoors to Shane walking out at the end of the night. So not a fan of this location at all. But we don't get a look at that location quite yet, because the very first thing we see as Nitro comes on the air is Vince McMahon. He's opening up from the Raw set. Big classic promo. We all remember this. He's standing there in front of the chain link fence Raw set with the trash cans and shit. And he talks about how he has now purchased WCW and he owns his competition. And he says he will address the WCW fans and reveal the fate of WCW later on in a special simulcast. And he does the deal where he says the fate of WCW lies in my hands. And that was a pretty powerful line there. And he's just going to fuck with them all night. And Vince, you could tell he really enjoyed this. He relished in this. A couple of times, I think he even took his gloating a bit overboard. He was being a little bit fucking obnoxious during a lot of this. I thought he could have been, there was probably a better balance of being, of gloating and say, yeah, motherfuckers, or whatever, and, being professional. So I think he just took a little bit overboard, especially when he would be on their show making out with Trish and stuff. Like, Jesus, Vince. My God. But anyway, he says he's going to address everybody later on. We then go into that really, really terrible WCW intro. You compare that to the badass intro Raw had at the time. This is what I'm talking about. These companies did not resemble each other. And, they felt like TNA to me, when I look at just how bad they were, later years TNA, like, recent years TNA. Just looked Bush League. Everything looked Bush League. So we open up now. We're on Panama City Beach, Florida. The resort there, the pyro goes off, blah, blah, blah. Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson welcome us to the event. And this was a pretty surreal moment, too, to see Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson. But really, Tony talk about Vince McMahon. He says, Mr. McMahon says our fate lies in his hands. Just to hear them, I cannot stress how surreal this was for fans living through this. You cannot just kind of you can't just go back and watch this and try to get that feeling. It was so bizarre to hear them talk about Vince McMahon when these companies were, at each other's throats. I mean, just a couple of years before this, Bischoff was challenging Vince McMahon on their pay-per-view, and they were poking fun at him and all this. Now they got to smooch his butt on TV if they want to have any chance of having a job or going over or whatever. And we would not see Tony Schiavone involved in wrestling really at all very much. I think he popped in here or there, but for the most part, he was absent until AEW kind of surfaced. And, now we get to hear his voice again on TNT. But this is a really sad day for wrestling and probably for Shivani and Hudson and everybody in WCW. And they had to go along with it. They're the wrestling announcers. They're supposed to be smartened up to everything that's going on, but they really, truly, honestly don't know what's going on, and they don't know what's going to happen. And that just put a really just kind of shocking type of tone to all of this. And Shivani, you could see that. You could hear it in his voice. You could see it in his face. He was shocked just to be saying what he was saying, because it's not like you had weeks to prepare for this. They thought maybe it was going to go in one direction. A week prior to this, probably 7 days earlier, there was probably some pretty optimistic people in the company, like Shivani. Oh, Eric's going to take it. Everything's going to be fine, shit like that or whatever. And then it completely does a U-turn to, wow, you have been swallowed up by your own damn competition. I can only imagine what was going through their head. Holy shit. Anyway, Ric Flair's music hits. He comes out to the ring, and he was a good person to have open up this show, especially if they're going to send off Nitro in a certain way. Him coming out there first, I think, was appropriate, and he cuts a hell of a promo. And he kind of takes exception a little bit to Vince McMahon. He says, did I hear Vince McMahon say that he's going to hold our lives in his hands? And this is going to be his last time on TBS. And he goes on to really take exception to Vince saying that, because you mean to tell me, and he goes on to name drop a bunch of people, you mean to tell me you're going to put all the legends like Sting and Lex Luger and the Steiners and the Road Warriors and Ricky Steamboat and myself, you're going to hold all of our lives in your hands? I don't think so, Jack, or whatever. So he takes exception to that and drops a little bit of knowledge about Vince's dad, which we all knew this. But Vince Sr., back in the day, he was on the board of directors in the NWA. And the way they determined the champions around that time is it had to be like a 2/3 vote or something with the board of directors to vote on who the champion is. And Vince Sr. always voted for Ric Flair to be champion. So not sure, even in 2001, if it was a really good idea to just anally violate kayfabe like that right there on the final WCW Nitro, but that's what he decided to do. But we all knew that, and he just went on to talk about the history and stuff, and he would come in later on in the year. I was there. I was at Raw when Flair made his return to the company in Charlotte night after Survivor Series, about 8 months after this. But at this time, Flair probably didn't know what he was going to do, and basically says they're not going down without a fight type of thing. We're going to make this a history-making show, and the history of Nitro and WCW, we're going to go out with dignity and respect, and talks about the history and all of his great opponents, but that his greatest opponent was Sting, and he wants to have a match with Sting tonight on the final ever Nitro, which I think was perfect because they worked the first ever Nitro in the mall. So here, having a match between the two of them, even though neither one of them are really, especially Flair, was not prepared to wrestle. Just seeing him out in that black T-shirt was just another example of how this show had just, it had lost its magic. Everything just was so dark. It's just, this whole show was depressing. I hated watching it, to be honest. It was just really kind of a depressing feel or atmosphere. I can't describe it, but just not a fan. Even at this time, even as bad as WCW Nitro was, there was something about this show that was just like even worse. But this was still a hell of a promo by Ric Flair, and we would be seeing him later on. It is kind of funny, he really stepped up here and defended WCW and went to bat for them and talked about the history and everything. It's a stark contrast to what we would hear him say in interviews, because throughout the years we've heard nothing but Flair shit on WCW, talk about how he wished the company would have closed down years before it did, and how it was a piece of crap, and he was happy that it closed down. I mean, man, all the bad things he said about this company that really he helped make, and is the majority of his career where he found his biggest success and became the biggest star and became a household name was with Crockett and WCW and all of that. To shit on it now the way he does, even though he's got he's warranted in a lot of those shittings, because there was a lot that they did wrong. He, of all people, though, somebody that benefited the most from everything there, is pretty surprising to hear him say that. By the way, I rarely drink beer in the afternoon, but since it's the 20th anniversary of the final Nitro, I just thought we'd toast one to Nitro. Cheers to WCW. I may have been hard on it in the past when I was a kid, or not a kid, but when I was younger, and I may have been firmly behind at WWE in the war, but I cannot deny how important they were to wrestling and how they changed everything. And without them, without chain of events taking place, especially with Hall and Nash leaving and probably the Montreal Screwjob, combined with the creation of Nitro, those things coming together took the business in a completely different direction, and it would not even resemble itself today had things like that not happened. So, and plus I miss it. Like I've said, I miss WCW Nitro. I wish it was still on the air. I'd do anything to go back 25 years. So cheers to WCW. I take back everything I said. I would sure love to have you back. After that, we had a Slim Jim and Spring Breakout ad sponsored by 1-800-COLLECT and AOL Online. How can I describe this to you kids? Back in the day when you had to make a phone call, if you had to call like a faraway land, far, far away, it would cost you money, like a lot of money. If you just made a long distance call from here to the East Coast, you'd rack up some bills. And so there was all these different phone numbers out there you can call collect or charge things. I remember the 10-10-220 commercials that George Carlin did. And you would just dial 10-10-220 prior to the number you want to dial, and would only charge you like 10 cents a minute. Shit was crazy back then. And AOL Online, boy, you people, Barry, you're complaining about Peacock. I invite you to transport yourself back to 1998 or 7 and just use some America Online, some dial-up, and all that noise that it makes, and it takes 4.5 hours to download just one photo, or not even download, look at one photo, or look at an image, or pull up a website. You're sitting there for an hour and a half. Things used to be a lot harder, so be happy you live where you live now. But anyway, fun watching that Slim Jim and Spring Breakout shit. After that, the first match on the show was kind of a big one. Maybe should have been the main event, but I'm cool with Sting and Flair being the main event. It's Scott Steiner, the World Heavyweight Champion, WCW World Heavyweight Champion, taking on Booker T, United States Champion, title for title. So this one was kind of interesting because Scott Steiner was the champion around this point, and you got to think, WWE is there now. They're in charge. They might have already talked to Booker, or Booker might have said, "Hey, I'm interested in coming over." Steiner's a guy that's probably going to sit out and take the money, and just sit out on his contract, or take the buyout, or whatever the fuck happened there. Basically, just take the money and not compete. But he's got the title, so you got to get the title off of him. So they put him in a title for title match. Pretty decent match here between the two of them. I was never really a big Scott Steiner fan, even back in these days. Much preferred Booker T. Booker T in the finish goes for a bookend, which is basically his version of the rock bottom, countered by Scott Steiner into a pretty impressive Northern Lights near fall there. Scott Steiner, even in 2001, when I thought he had really physically declined in terms of what he could do athletically in the ring, that was pretty good looking stuff there. In the end, he goes for a power bomb. Booker counters it, hits him with a successful attempt on the bookend this time for the win, and wins the title, and is now your WCW and U.S. champion as WCW closes down. And we would see him come in at King of the Ring, right? He came in. That was really what sparked the invasion. I think Austin had made an appearance, in Lance Storm, I think. But Booker T coming in, he was going to kind of be their figurehead of the WCW side, and he would really be the only big name to go over there. Flair wouldn't come in, like I said, until months later. Sting sat out. Everybody else that they could have used, sat out and was not present here. So Booker T really was their best case scenario on that entire roster, aside from Sting, who also wasn't coming in. Aside of who was coming over, Booker T by far was the best of all of them and should have been coming in as the champion. So kind of the right move to make there, I think, putting the belt on him. But I'm curious, how that actual decision came to be. Am I right in that thinking? Was Bruce there, and does he have an idea of saying, okay, we're probably going to be keeping Booker, so we better put the title on him? Or was it just a crapshoot and they were just, going by on instinct there? I don't know. We then cut back to Raw, sort of, where you're back in Vince McMahon's office. He's been in this office all during Raw and all during Nitro, so you kind of cut back to him on both shows. But here on Nitro, he's on the phone, and he's basically making fun of the Nitro location, just kind of like we were doing here in the beginning. And he's like, what an appropriate place for them to close down in this, I think he called what did he call it, a beer hall or something like that. So completely shit on the location, which is just funny. That's all the segment was. Basically on WCW's own show, they're going to say, we're going to cut to Vince McMahon so he can shit on your show for 30 seconds, and then we're going to come back and go to a match. They were just fucking with him, I think. They were really just... this was probably so sweet for so many people, especially Briscoe and shit, who was right there in the thick of that, that feud and everything. He was right in the middle of that screw job and everything that went on, him being there and stuff. He was probably just loving every minute of this shit. So I just think that whole segment, that 30 seconds or 45 seconds, whatever it took, was completely unnecessary. let's cut to Vince for him to piss in your face. And then we'll go back to 3 Count versus Young Dragons, which was our next match up. 3 Count, I forgot how just deliciously badass this threesome was. Holy crap. They're a great song they came out to. I can't lie, I was dancing. When I was watching, making my notes for this review, I dropped it like it's hot during the song. It's very, very good. Fucking Shane Helms, man. Hysterical. Anyway, we get I'm sorry, it wasn't Shane Helms wrestled later. It was the other 2 guys. It was Courageous and Shannon Moore taking on the Young Dragons, Kaz Hayashi and Jimmy Yang, who would come in, I believe, too. He'd come in a few years later, right, Jimmy? I don't remember if Kaz did, but everybody else except for Evan Courageous. I actually worked with one of his cousins back in North Carolina when I was working in a restaurant. One of the servers there had asked me, or I mentioned wrestling. Oh, you like wrestling? My cousin wrestled. Or wrestles. And I'm like, who's your cousin? And she goes, Evan Courageous. And I'm like, no kidding. I was like, I know exactly who he is. And that would have been probably in like 2000 or 2001, something like that. Yeah, so right around this time. Anyway, I worked with his cousin. But anywho, this was an interesting match because the winner got a shot at the Cruiserweight tag team titles. I completely forgot that these titles existed. By the way, as we talked about earlier, this show is also being billed as Night of Champions. So there's going to be a whole bunch of title matches here, which is really WWE's way of positioning all of these belts where they want them for the takeover. As the way it looked to me, but they were trying to make it seem like it was a celebration of champions, even running vignettes throughout the show of all the great champions in WCW history, which was a nice touch. But they were trying to pack in a lot here to this episode, Night of Champions and WCW send-off and Vince and all this stuff. It was a lot going on, but I completely forgot about the Cruiserweight tag titles. They had just come into existence, I think, the previous month or even maybe at the pay-per-view. So they were very, very new. But again, belts that I don't think they really needed at the time. Like, who has time to keep track of that shit? Anyway, this is a triple threat. 3 Count, Young Dragons, and Filthy Animals. I forgot to mention Ray and Kidman. They were involved in this too, and they were the ones also that WWE probably wanted to have the titles on more than anybody else, and they would win this triple threat. Sorry, I have my notes very, very strangely written. I should screenshot that and show you because it looked ridiculous, but I had trouble reading that. But yeah, anyway, Ray and Kidman win the triple threat against 3 Count and the Young Dragons, and they will have a shot at the Cruiserweight tag team titles later on in the show. Against Elix Skipper and I think Romero, I believe it was. We then cut back to Vince's office again. This time Trish comes in with champagne and she's ready to celebrate with some champagne, but Vince just feels like it'd be better to fuck. So they just start making out on the couch and and they cut away. So again, 2 segments in a row, completely pointless. The first one, Vince just decides to shit on Nitro, and the next one, he's going to make out with his mistress live on the other show. Like, does he have no, it's just so crazy, like, how he had no problem with, like, doing this. Like, have some fucking respect for yourself. Anyway, I just kind of laugh that every time they just cut back to Vince, it was to shit on WCW. He was a little obnoxious through this whole thing. I can't lie. I'm not saying that I wouldn't be either. I mentioned Sugar Shane Helms a minute ago. He was actually involved in the Cruiserweight title match with Chavo Guerrero. He's champion going into this. He beats him with the Vertebreaker. So that was pretty interesting. I barely remembered this match. I kind of assumed Chavo might pick up the win here, but Helms did, and Helms would be over. He'd be over pretty much right away in the buyout as well during the Invasion stuff. And I think by a year from now, he would be firmly into the Hurricane gimmick in WWE. So I'm glad he came over. In that acquisition there. He was really good. Man, oh man. Good times, man. After that, we have another perfect example of just how shit sucked on this show, and it didn't have this normal WCW feel. It didn't even feel like a WCW show. It was so whack. We get a Booker T promo celebrating his title win, talking about how he wants to prove that he's the best and how his journey is not even close to being over, kind of hinting that he's going to be making the jump to WWE, but during his promo, I could only hear about maybe 50% of it. It was so poorly recorded. The audio was so bad. They were having mic troubles or something. It just didn't have a good sound to it. And you could barely make out what he was saying. So again, just another dark, dark part. And it was dark. He wasn't even really lit very well. He was just standing there with the 2 titles, and just the lighting was poor. Everything production-wise was so poor. Piss poor on this show. Cannot say enough bad things about it. It was terrible. Anyway, so Booker T, he's champion, and he's happy about that. Next, we get the tag team title match. We get Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire WCW Tag Team Champions, defending against Lance Storm and Mike Awesome. But boy, did they take a while to get to this match. First, Lance Storm and Awesome come out. They make their entrance. Then we go to a commercial. Then we go back to Vince's locker room again. And this time, Michael Cole comes in. Vince is sitting there with Trish drinking the champagne. Michael Cole comes in and says that, hey, Vince, WCW stars are worried about their jobs. And basically, Vince says, fuck off. How do you feel about your job? How do you feel about your job security? Do you think you're going to be working here for another 20 years? I guess he did. And basically just shoos Michael Cole away. He leaves, and then he continues drinking champagne with Trish. So 3 segments in a row there, completely pointless. Vince just shitting on WCW. Hilarious. Then we cut back to the announce booth. We got Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson speculating on what's going to happen, basically just reiterating their shock over this whole ordeal. And I think we all were in shock that night. And the whole time you almost forget that they got that title match. They did all of this while Awesome and Storm just sat there in the ring. Then Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire come out. And this was a pretty okay match. These were 2 guys, even though they had zero. A lot of these guys in this match didn't have the name recognition of what we've come to expect from WCW. Mike Awesome and Lance Storm kind of did. Mike Awesome was kind of a big name, ECW champion, and that whole weird ordeal of how he got to WCW and walking out on them and jobbing to Taz and all that stuff, which was a really weird situation. And Lance Storm was always just been a pro and a stud, and they would both make the jump as well going over in the buyout. But Palumbo, and so would Palumbo and O'Haire. But Palumbo and O'Haire were still pretty new and pretty young and pretty green, but damn, they were pretty good. They had great size. They had a great look. And it's a shame what happened. It's a shame that Palumbo never really became much. I mean, Billy and Chuck was about the highest level of his success. And of course, O'Haire, who had just so much upside, had a great look, very Randy Orton, Batista type of presence to him. And they even tried to do something with him in WWE, putting him with Piper. And then, eventually he had his problems and his demons and substance abuse, and he eventually took his own life. And he would have been somebody that I just think had potential. Just his look, his physical look was just incredible. And Palumbo was super agile for a giant guy his size too. It's amazing that neither one of these guys, found any sort of like major success, because I thought they were both capable of it, man. For real. Anyway, pretty awesome finish. Super kick by Palumbo to Mike Awesome, and then a Swanton bomb for the win. So that Swanton bomb that O'Haire performed was incredible looking. So good, so graceful and athletic for somebody his size. He did it as gracefully as an Eddie Guerrero would do it, and even more so than a Jeff Hardy. Just really good stuff there. And I was pretty much just taken back by, it's been 20 years, so I guess I kind of forgot how athletic these guys were and how much potential that really was there. I can understand why WWE brought them in on the buyout. These guys have potential, but unfortunately they hadn't really created any super big names for themselves, because by the time they found success in WCW, nobody was watching WCW. So they really weren't viewed as like major stars, and they really wouldn't have much of an impact in the invasion at all during the whole thing. Holy shit, I had completely forgotten that Bam Bam Bigelow was still in the company around this time. Totally forgot that. Him and Sean Stasiak, I'm sorry, had a match up next. I think they also had a match at the pay-per-view prior to this. They showed a recap of that, and I completely forgot that Bam Bam was still hanging around in 01 doing stuff. I thought he was kind of done by that point. I remember when he came in 98, and that surprised me enough, because Bam Bam did not get along with the Clique and shit. So when he came into WCW, I was like surprised that, he was in there. I'm like, man, if you fell victim to their stroke and their politics in WWE, imagine how bad it's going to be here. But they probably also paid him a lot, so he was like, fuck it. I think there's a stipulation in this. I think if Sean Stasiak loses, he has to get tattooed by Bam Bam Bigelow or something. Now, Sean Stasiak was previously in the WWE, if you guys remember, as Meat. And he was with PMS, I think, and Terry Runnels and all that. They were calling him Meat. And I remember he got let go because he did some weird shit. I think it was a story of him like recording conversations with wrestlers. Like he would have a tape recorder on him when he would talk to people, and he got caught doing that, and they let him go just for being weird. Because that is kind of weird. What the fuck are you doing? Why are you wearing a wire talking to people? So that was a whole strange situation. He gets let go. WCW picks him up, and he I don't really recall really what he did there. He didn't do a whole lot. He would have a match. Was it a tag team it was like the Mr. Perfect theme or something? You guys help me out with my history there. But anyway, He's got to face Bam Bam here. Miss Hancock, Stacy Keibler, comes out to the ring first, asks all of the fans if they want to see her dance, and introduces the man, the light of her life, and the man that rocks her world and all that shit, Sean Stasiak, which is gross. He comes to the ring, match starts. Bam Bam makes pretty quick work of Stasiak, knocking him down and hitting him with the diving rope or the top rope diving headbutt finisher. But Stacy distracts the referee, allowing Stasiak to hit the reverse neckbreaker, kind of like a rude awakening, on Bam Bam Bigelow for the win and saving himself getting tattooed. And Stasiak, I believe they would bring him in as well, so WWE would forgive him for the weird recording situation, and he would come in as well, I think, during the invasion stuff, if I remember right. Time to shit on WCW some more. We cut backstage again. Vince is in his dressing room. This time, William Regal walks in. William Regal's wearing his WrestleMania 17 baseball jersey, and Regal goes on to shit on WCW and says, Vince, are you sure you want to buy that company? I was there. It was terrible. He talks about the drug addicts or something in the company. Like, my God, Regal, yo, dude. You know, this is a guy that would have his own personal problems in WWE, and they would, they'd forgive him multiple times. So I thought that was kind of funny that, again, now we're on segment 4 here of, let's just cut to Raw. Let's just cut to Vince McMahon so he can shit on us segment of the show. This is like the 4th time now. Regal's in there, just shitting on everything, which is kind of funny because he has an interesting departure from the company as well, just like Meat did in WWE. He left. He got fired after that Goldberg match on Nitro for what the company felt was, going into business for himself or exposing Goldberg or shooting on Goldberg when it really wasn't the case, at least Regal's story. He's like, they told me to give him 6 minutes. 6 minutes seems like a lot for a Goldberg match, but Regal was kind of wrestling him and counter holding him and basically just kind of tying him in a knot and confusing him, because it's not hard to do that to a 1997 Goldberg or whatever it was at the time, or 98. So he kind of exposed Goldberg's greenness and weakness a little bit there, but the trained eye already knew that, and it was enough to kind of get him in hot water with the WWE or WCW, and they would wind up letting him go. But when they cut back to Nitro, Schiavone did not like that at all. He heard what Regal said, and he goes, "Can you believe that?" And he took exception and called him Steven Regal. He goes, "All the things we did here in WCW, including putting his ass over." So Schiavone did not like that at all, and I don't blame Schiavone, but how does it feel, Mr. Butts in Seats? Shoes on the other foot now, because how do you think Mick Foley felt? He probably felt just like you did. He was personally insulted by that, Schiavone. When Regal came on there and shit on the company that you work for, after everything, all the hard work they did for him, and like Schiavone said, like everything they did for Regal, like putting him over, how the fuck do you think Mick Foley feels when you said Butts in Seats after everything Mick Foley did for WCW? The bumps, the bruises, the crazy abuse he put his body through for that company. He had every right to feel that way too. So I can kind of, I didn't blame Tony for being mad, because like all of these Vince McMahon segments, they were completely unnecessary. But it was kind of funny when you think about it, because even though Bischoff did instruct him to say that line, it really wasn't Tony's fault. Even Mick acknowledges that. It's kind of funny when, they would say that about Mick Foley, somebody who actually is busting their ass. WCW, he was talking about them as a whole, as everything the company did for Regal, where Foley was making his actual body. And when Foley is having, multiple concussions and losing ears and knocking out teeth, and then somebody shits on that, how do you think that makes him feel? So it's kind of like how many times have I said it on this podcast? What goes around comes around. So I found that humorous. After that, we get a pre-tape interview from DDP earlier on in the day. He's just chilling on the beach. Talks about the future of WCW that he doesn't know, the future of DDP, and goes on to thank all of the fans for really supporting him, and his wife Kimberly as well for supporting him. And he, that was cool of him to do that, because when you think of DDP and his rise to success there, he was super over, and he got over on his own, and he kept working, and he was a guy that was there before all the big stars came in. He got over after everybody was there, when you would have been even more prone to being lost in the shuffle with all these big names and all this politics going on. He was able to get over during that, but back when WCW had no stars at all, he wasn't very over, which is kind of interesting. But he had an interesting rise, and he was a hot guy in the company, man. And NWO and Hall and Nash and Savage and Hogan, a lot of guys went out of their way to help him out, which is pretty interesting, because it kind of goes against what they've done in the past. So he acknowledged that the fans supporting him really helped facilitate that, because without that fan support, those guys might not have wanted to put him over and stuff. So pretty cool interview there. But he goes on to say that, DDP is just getting started as well. If he only knew what WWE would have in store for him when he would come in. Hey, you know what we're going to have you do? You're going to stalk someone's wife and just be completely shit on and look like a bitch. You cool with that? Yeah, that's fine. Whatever. Ugh, my God. So anyway, cool to see DDP kind of one last time there on Nitro. We go backstage again to Vince's, or we go back to Raw, I should say, to Vince's dressing room. He's on the phone with someone, and basically he says it's about that time. So he's gearing up to go out to the ring to do this big simulcast and address all of the WCW fans and the WCW audience. After that, we get the Cruiserweight Tag Team title match that was set up earlier on with Ray and Kidman winning that triple threat. Primetime, Elix Skipper and Rocky Romero defending the titles against Ray and Kidman. Pretty good match. Kidman, he escapes the play of the day by Elix Skipper, counters it into an unprettier, whatever he calls his version of that, to win the belt. So Kidman and Ray was a pretty solid tag team. Man, they should have been regular tag team champions, not Cruiserweight tag team champions. So they win the belt here. Still weird, win the belt. Still weird to see maskless Ray out there having matches and stuff, and it would be a while. It would be a year and a half or more until Ray got there. He got in I guess a year and a half. He came in 2002. So yeah, he would kind of sit out a little bit as well. He didn't have anything to do with the invasion, but Kidman would, I think, and Kidman would go on to be a producer in WWE. I think he's still there, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, good match there, and new Cruiserweight Tag Team Champions. We go backstage to a Sting promo. He's cutting a promo in a room filled with all of these hanging bats, like baseball bats, and says it's time for one last dance with Ric Flair, and basically says that one thing that's for sure about Sting is nothing for sure, delivers that line, and just hypes up the match later on. He was the only legend with the balls to show up here. Props to Sting. He would not be heading over to WWE after this. I'm curious that if what they thought backstage, I'm sure he talked to Bruce or Briscoe or somebody or Shane, but they would put him over here in the main event, and I'm curious if they just assumed he would be coming in, but he didn't want to. He didn't want anything to do with them. So I think we cut back one more time to Vince as he's walking to the ring or something, and now it's time for the final match in WCW history. I mean, at least this version of it. Technically, you had a Booker T and Buff Bagwell match on Raw, but I'm not going to count that. This really is the last match in WCW history, unless you count the Worldwide show that aired a couple days later on syndication. That actually was the final ever WCW show on television. But really, the last live match, all that shit was taped on that show, was here. Ric Flair versus Sting. This is it. Would have been nicer if these guys were a little bit more prepared, or they had an angle going into this. It was just a match put together at the end. Flair was not really in ring shape. Came out to the ring in his robe, but wearing a black T-shirt. The match, I don't know. It wasn't bad, all things considered. Ric Flair was still able to kind of do the typical Flair bumps. He wasn't able to do the flip in the corner thing, but he took the big top rope backdrop, the figure four, and Sting did his, Stinger splash bump and all that stuff. So they still hit each other with their shit. Big superplex spot too, which was pretty impressive for Flair and Sting to take. I guess I'm still looking at them now as like 80-year-old guys, but at this time they were still capable, so they were doing some stuff, and they're not in their prime. Neither one of them were in their peak physical condition, but I thought the match was acceptable for what it was. And like I said, it's appropriate that Flair was out there in a T-shirt on this show that just had such a dark, depressing vibe to it. Did not resemble anything like what WCW shows had represented or felt like in the past. Around 96, 97, 98, those peak years of Nitro, it had a feel to it. I can't describe it, but there was a certain just feel that the atmosphere had. And it really gave you a different feel than the other show, and that's something that's sorely missed now. AEW does a pretty good job of that, but I think Nitro did an even better job because the two shows were very different. Now everybody kind of follows the same formula, big stage, big screen, ring in the middle, all that stuff, but back in the day, it was still kind of a work in progress how things were going to be set up, and both shows had a different feel to them, especially Raw with their 1 hour taped shit. 4 weeks of TV they would do in one night, and they would just run these taped shows. They were kind of underwhelming, small buildings, no big elaborate pyro or anything, where WCW was starting to introduce pyro, bigger audiences, live TV, and shit like that, and they really had different feels. The announcers had a different feel. Vince had a very different energy. than, a Bischoff or a Shivani or a Mongo McMichael or whoever else. The shows felt different. And this here just did not feel like a WCW show at all. I missed the vibe. I missed the feel that that WCW gave you. You know how days have a feel? They talk about this in Seinfeld. Like Monday has a feel. Friday has a feel. Nitro had a feel. And that's just the best way I can describe it. There was just a certain feel about it. And this show did not represent that at all. But in the end, Sting, after the superplex, follows it up. Scorpion Deathlock, like I said. Ric Flair taps out. They embrace, they hug after the match, celebrate the match. That's the final match in history, and it was really the last time for Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson as well, because even though the show wasn't over, they were done. Tony, I think, got a little bit teary-eyed during that, when he was talking about the match with Flair and Sting, and they thanked the fans for their years of support and signed off for the last time as WCW announcers, because the rest of this show was really raw. I mean, all the simulcast was Nitro just turning off and then everything being on Raw. That's all it was, really. So that was it. And then they immediately after that, they cut to Raw now. You got Vince. It's like they were trying to get the timing right or something, because Vince is now walking away from ringside for some reason, going up the ramp, instructing Lillian to reintroduce him. So it looked like to me they were trying to do that for the live crowd there. So when it cut over from WCW, it would make it look like Vince was just coming down to make his entrance. Felt like that's what they were trying to do there. But Lillian reintroduces him, who just looked adorable in her little WrestleMania outfit. Hilarious. She reintroduces Vince. He comes down to the ring, and this is when he cuts a pretty epic promo, but not before a pretty epic botch. Vince, what the hell? He goes, I remember when I heard this, I'm like, oh, Vince, I bet he wished he could have had that one back. And he goes on to say, this is a special simulcast. He goes, not only is this broadcast being seen right here on TNN, it's also being seen on TNN. So Nitro and Raw are on TNN and TNN. But because I missed them being on the USA Network. Remember when they went to TNN and then it was Spike TV? Remember We Got Pop? All that crazy shit. Oh, my God. But, of course, Nitro was on TNT, and Vince kind of botched the line there. But he then goes on to reveal, because we got to remember, too, that during all of this on Raw, this is the go-home show to WrestleMania. So this is a huge development that has taken place just days before the biggest pay-per-view in recent history in that company, where all that should be all their focus. You talk about a distraction. Holy shit. So I thought, it's like they didn't have time to really come up with a good plan here, but I thought they had a decent enough one because Vince and Shane had a big match at WrestleMania. So to tie this into that was pretty quick thinking, I suppose, on their part. So that's when Vince goes on to talk about what his plans are. And he says that the executives are begging him to buy WCW, and he says he has agreed, although the deal is not totally done yet. And he says he is AOL Time Warner has signed the contract, and I will sign the contract, but I'm going to sign the contract this Sunday at WrestleMania only when Ted Turner himself brings the contract to the ring and presents it to me, and I will sign it, which is just ludicrous, because by then Ted had nothing to do with this. If Ted was still in charge, there wouldn't be a sale here. So it's funny that Vince is still so hung up on that vendetta with Ted Turner. It's like, after 9/11, we attacked Iraq, for the for the weapons of mass destruction and for the terrorist attacks. They had nothing to do with it. So Vince is now trying to get at Ted Turner, and his hands are clean of this one. If he was still in charge, this wouldn't be happening right now. So he thinks Ted Turner is going to come down to the ring at WrestleMania, and then he just goes on to continue what he was already doing on Nitro. Let's shit on WCW. And he talks about buying his competition, and he basically takes all of the credit for winning the war, and says the line, the best way to beat a billionaire is to become one yourself, which is really what he did. WWE, like we talked about earlier on in the podcast, how everything changed, with, the NWO and the WWE kind of back against the corner, different direction, making new stars, Austin, Rock, Triple H, Mankind, Taker, and Kane. All these guys are birthed out of this and had an amazing attitude era, and they just annihilated WCW. But it was definitely a team effort, not just Vince's vision and Vince's vision alone. And we've seen what shit Vince's vision is, at least in modern times, in WWE. So he's out there being a complete prick. And he has that great, intense promo where he talks about, you got to squeeze the life out of your competition, not only in life, but in business. And that's what he did to WCW. and then goes on to ask, and that's what he's going to do, I should say, to Shane at WrestleMania, is squeeze Shane to death. Going to kill his own son, apparently, at WrestleMania. So then he starts to ask the fans what he should do with WCW. Should he put it on the shelf? And then he starts walking through a bunch of names, even making fun of Hulk Hogan a little bit, and starts name dropping guys to the crowd, running through all the stars, none of which were on WCW. Maybe one or two were, but most of these guys he mentioned weren't even on the last Nitro and probably weren't coming over. He mentions by name Hulk Hogan, Lex Luger, and Buff Bagwell. All got pretty decent responses, especially Buff Bagwell, which sucks because I was never a big fan of him, but would explain why they would bring him in a couple weeks after this, or a couple months, I should say. Booker T also got a very good reaction. The biggest reaction came from Big Papa Pump, which again was surprising for you fans that are my age watching this time. Was he really that over? I didn't think he was. I didn't like Big Papa Pump. I thought Scott Steiner's gimmick was fucking stupid in WCW. I did not like it at all. I loved the Steiner brothers. I just did a top 10 favorite tag teams video just a couple of months ago where the Steiners are on that list. I love the Steiners, but Scott's gimmick and his just physical transformation and his work as a heel, I thought he was just kind of a little bit weird and unstable, and I didn't really enjoy him very much. And he had his moments, but I just did not find him as an entertaining, like, big star. And he was like one of their big world champions, and he got a huge ovation from the crowd. And I guess I just never saw it. I never saw the appeal in the big bad booty daddy. I thought it was fucking dumb, to be honest with you. He also mentions Goldberg, who got a pretty big pop. He would have been ideally one of the best ones to come in, and also mentions Sting. The crowd even chants for Goldberg, actually, during this, and brings up Sting as well. So none of these names, except for Booker T, would come over. None of them would. Hogan, Luger, Buff would be there for one night, so he doesn't really count. Pump wouldn't come in, or Steiner wouldn't come in until 03, or no, late 02, I believe, right? Survivor Series, I think? Yeah, Survivor Series 02, so it'd be a good almost 2 years before he'd come in. And Goldberg, about the same thing, about 2 for him to come in. He came in right after WrestleMania 19. And Sting, of course, would never come in. So, but instead, they got fucking Stasiak and Palumbo and shit. So just weird. But Vince is in there. You know, he's doing his gloating. He says his biggest regret is that he wishes he would have flown down to Panama City. And this is kind of funny. He goes, assuming they have an airport there, which is hilarious. Calls it the Redneck Riviera or whatever, and says that he wished he would have gone down there and gotten in their ring and been able to be there to fire each and every one of them to their face, because that's what's going to happen. WCW is, in fact, going on the shelf. WCW is no more, and WCW is buried. So he is now vowing as the evil owner to bury his competition, never to see the light of day again. All of this talent is fired, and you're never going to see WCW on TV. And then the No Chance in Hell music hits, because back in these days, I don't think the Here Comes the Money song had debuted yet, I don't think. So No Chance hits, and we cut to the big Titantron, and you see Shane McMahon walking out live on Nitro. Now we're live on Nitro. Shane comes out to the ring, gets in the ring. The crowd is kind of popping, but like I said in the beginning here, how cool would it have been had he been able to be in an arena, even in WCW, even in 2001 standards, if you found a place that just had 5,000 people there, it would have created quite the pop, I think, from actual wrestling fans who are seeing this very surreal moment play out before their eyes. I mean, imagine if you rewind here 2 years, 3 years. Imagine if McMahon. Imagine on that Slamboree. Was it Slamboree that Eric Bischoff challenged Vince McMahon? We knew it wasn't going to happen, but imagine if he would have walked out there that night. That would have, that is what I always envisioned if there was ever some sort of a crossover here. So even though Shane coming out to the ring, getting in a WCW ring, holding a WCW microphone, and we get that WCW Shane McMahon graphic coming across the screen, which was just incredibly surreal. All that is just so awesome and so crazy, but at the same time, would have been better if it would have been like in an actual Nitro set indoors and all of that. I would have just preferred that much better. But like I said, Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson, they were kicked off at the end of the Sting Flair match. So Paul Heyman and Jim Ross are your announcers for this final segment on Nitro. Those are the voices you hear. So Nitro, really after Flair and Sting, that really honestly kind of is the end, because after this, it just became Raw, except for, Shane coming out. So Shane is now in the ring. Vince McMahon, of course, I've got his face on the screen here. He takes the big gulp and he's looking at Shane and what's he doing there? And Jim Ross blurts out, he's on Nitro. And Paul Heyman is saying, just hearing Heyman and JR, hearing JR's voice on WCW programming was fucking crazy. was absolutely crazy. So Shane says, "What's up, Vince? You're there in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm here in Panama City, Florida." And because Vince dragged his feet on signing the contract because he wants Ted Turner to bring it down to the ring at WrestleMania, he took advantage of that. And he goes, "There has been a purchase, and the contract has been signed. But the name on the contract does say McMahon, but it doesn't say Vince McMahon. It reads Shane McMahon." And then Vince's eyes pops out of his head, and Shane says, "I now own WCW, and it'll go on to kick your ass again. And you're in trouble, Vince, and I'm going to kick your ass this Sunday at WrestleMania, and I'm going to relaunch WCW, and I'm going to put you out of business, Dad." So that was a pretty big moment. Vince, the whole time, is just sitting there, dumbfounded. He's crapping his pants, and the show basically goes off the air with Shane kind of smirking in the camera, and I'll never forget that wide shot. I saved an image of it here so I could put it on the screen. But this shot, as Nitro goes off the air, of the Raw set with Shane McMahon's face and that copyright WCW watermark on the bottom, that image right there, I cannot explain to wrestling fans how fucking surreal it is to look at something like that. And I'll never forget that show going off the air that night, seeing that image, being like, wow, what kind of a weird chapter are we entering into here? I mean, it's about to get super nuts. And how crazy would it be that this whole show here ended with Vince as the heel and Shane as the babyface, and that would completely reverse by the time the invasion started. Even at WrestleMania, Shane beats Vince. Amazing match. Mick Foley referee. Shane kicking Vince in the nards. Fucking Trish Stratus, Stephanie, all that stuff going on there. Big Van Daminator to Vince with the trash can on his face, and Shane winning. Big, huge babyface moment for Shane. But then by the time we would get to the summer and the invasion would start, Vince was now, of course, because Vince wanted WWE to be the babyface. He didn't want the outsiders coming in and being the baby faces. Vince is like, I'm not gonna write in my own TV, WCW comes in and kicks my ass. Vince isn't gonna be able to do that. So they kind of had to reverse it to where WWE had to be the baby faces. And when you combine that with WCW's lack of star power, even the alliance, even teaming up with ECW wasn't enough to really provide them the star power needed to make this feel real. And where they had all these people that Vince mentioned in the promo, the Hogans and the Flairs and the Lugers and stuff, it might have been a whole different story. And the Goldbergs and the Stings. So pretty crazy time period, man, for WCW to go off the air like that with WWE's programming and WWE's voices and their production. It's just pretty crazy, but that was how WCW closed its doors. That was the end of WCW, to see that just ending there and WWE taking it over. Just it blows my mind to this day that something like that happened. It's something we'll never see again. I can't see a situation like that with AEW and WWE. It would just be too impossible kind of thing. Tony Khan would have to play the role of Ted Turner. Tony Khan eventually down the road one day would have to decide that he doesn't want to own it anymore, sell it, and then whoever buys it doesn't want it anymore, and then it folds or something. But by then, I think it could be a reversal. Vince is gonna. I don't want to say that, but Vince isn't going to be alive forever. He's already in his late 70s, mid 70s. So when that ship sails, who knows? Maybe WWE sells to Disney, and then Disney decides they don't want it anymore. History could repeat. We'll see. Who knows what the future holds for wrestling? But I'm kind of a little bit worried, to be honest with you. But anyway, that is the end of Nitro. Not a good show by any means, but just pretty damn surreal, man. I sat on my couch on the edge of my damn seat. I thought about it all day at work. I was ready to get home and see that. Sat right down there with some takeout food from work and watched it. And oh my God, what a time. What a crazy time. I haven't said anything to the chat here in a bit, so let me go up here and knock out some of the super chats that I missed while we were rambling on, and then we'll relive some of y'all's memories if you have any of this. Let me scroll back and make sure I don't miss anybody on that. We got SmackDown starting in about 30 minutes, so we'll wrap up the podcast here in just a few. K-Dogs, Kennel, you are back, man. Appreciate the 5. The Attitude Era had tons of controversial moments. I'm really hoping Peacock doesn't eliminate all that content. They're going to eliminate a lot. Especially, think about the Attitude Era, man. Think about how much shit. Oh, my God. I'm glad I had all those Raws taped myself, because I might never see some of those segments again without that. But yeah, that Sammy segment with Mark Henry and Maybe they might even take out Mae Young giving birth to the hand. Who knows what they'll do? No more DX Nation parody for sure. That's gone. Roger Dat 91. Roger that, because that is not going to be there. Absolutely not. And appreciate the $2 from you, man. Thank you. And like I said on Sunday, when we do WrestleMania 6, they've cut out the whole Roddy Piper Bad News Brown stuff. So we don't get the promo, we don't get the match, which is all fine, but it fucks it up for the timing. But we got a solution. We're still doing it. WrestleMania 6 will go off without a hitch this Sunday. Jimmy Anderson, welcome back, man. Good to see you too as well. Yeah, this is a special episode because we're doing a lot prior to WrestleMania. We've got watch-alongs, we've got special episodes, we've got reviews, and we've got like 8 days of streaming in a row, or 7 days of streaming in a row coming up on WrestleMania week. So I'll be here, man. Appreciate the super chat from all the way over on the other side of the world. You are the best. Let's see, did I miss anybody else? There's another one from Joseph Smith. Thank you, buddy, for the $2. I remember this as if it were yesterday. I do too, man. I remember everything. I remember calling the hotlines and listening to the updates. And the one hotline, the main hotline that I called, that I got a lot of my news from, only because it was a free one. I got he ran a New York hotline like I did, but he had more credible news sources, and I kind of went to him for all of that. And he trolled everybody on the hotline because back then, also what was going on for WrestleMania was the Gimmick Battle Royal. And so like every week they would announce like another name for the Gimmick Battle Royal. And that was very fun for wrestling fans to think about, like Earthquake and Typhoon coming back and Repo Man and shit like that. So he went on this long, like 10-minute update on the Gimmick Battle Royal to open the episode. Big news. He's like, big news, everybody. I know most of you have heard by now, but we got to open up with it right away. Sergeant Slaughter has been announced for the Gimmick Battle Royal, and I'm going to update you guys now on the names. And he just went on and on and on, and you can't fast forward, you can't do anything, and you have to listen to him go through this Gimmick Battle Royal shit when you know he's trolling. And at the very end of it, after he's done listing the names and after 10 minutes, and he goes, oh, in other news, WWF bought WCW. And then that was the end of the report. And then the next day, he gave all the details on it. So it was a complete troll job. I still laugh my ass off when I think about that. And for you young people, I can't even explain how different it was to read wrestling news. If you were a subscriber to the Torch, or Georgian Acropolis, or the Observer, this shit would come to you in the mail. Or you could kind of call hotlines, and there was really nothing on the internet. So you could pay for hotlines, or you could call, free ones that would supply news, and I would be doing that all the time. That's how I got my wrestling news. Because by the time the Gimmick magazines came out, I would buy those just to kind of read through them and stuff, but you wouldn't get any wrestling news out of those. So it was very hard to kind of keep tabs on backstage stuff unless you were a newsletter subscriber, which I was. But you still have to, I would still call the hotlines too to get like up-to-date, minute-to-minute type of shit. So I was listening to all of the news that previous week. Once it started to be known that WCW was probably going to sell, that's when I really started paying attention, and Vince's name was thrown around, but nobody believed it would happen. Nobody really thought it would happen. No way. They're not. It was basically what people were saying is they're not going to let Vince buy it. They're not going to sell to Vince or whatever. So, somebody's going to step in, and many people thought it was Bischoff. And looking back, that would have been the best thing to do. Bischoff purchasing the company, would have been the best option because he had a love for it. By then, even though Bischoff had his problems and he wasn't perfect, and and a lot of the decisions he made in WCW weren't the best ones, he had like a love for it. He felt by that point like it was his company because he was in charge. He was pulling so many strings, and he was there in the middle of it, just like Vince was, not only internally running everything, but also on camera. So Bischoff really lived and breathed all of that, and he had a personal relationship and connection with the company. And I think he would have been a good guy to take it over because he would have cared, and it didn't work out. And then Vince bought it, and we would see what would happen. The Invasion was a disaster. I think the first person on their show, I think it was Mike Awesome, or might have been Lance Storm. He was Lance Storm, Mike Awesome, and then Booker T at King of the Ring. And they would bring a few guys in here and there, but it became known pretty quick that WCW didn't have enough star power to really be a credible invasion, a credible opponent for WWE, for Austins and Rocks and Takers and Canes and Angles and guys like that. Triple H was out, Benoit was out, and the roster was still 10 times stronger. So that's when they did the ECW thing, because right at the same time, that's something we should have talked about earlier on, but right at the same time of WCW closing down its doors, so did ECW. And Heyman came in right after Lawler left, and took over there, and he was able to work out a deal where ECW sold out to WWE, kind of bailing out Paul Heyman of all his financial, problems that he probably had. So all of that was coming too. Basically, all three of these companies that were each individually successful and running individual pay-per-views, not 2 years before this or just a few months before this, but a couple. Think about 1998, where all three of these companies were hot. WWE was hot, WCW was cooling off but still kind of hot, and ECW was hot. And all of their pay-per-views were usually pretty good. Maybe not WCW. They had some stinkers in 98, but ECW shows were still crazy, still loaded with violence, still had a lot of, fan interaction, and were doing well. And here it is a couple years later, 2001, and all three of them are now under the same umbrella. That's crazy. So with everything going on with WCW, ECW was closing down as well. But much like WCW, by this point, ECW was a shell of itself as well. They lost everybody to WWE and Vince. I mean, Raven left, and Stevie Richards left, and Taz left, and the Dudleys left, and all their big star. The only one that stuck around was Tommy Dreamer. Even Terry Funk would go to WWE and WCW. He would work for all three of them. In 98, 99, I think he worked for all three companies. Or he worked ECW in 97. He worked WWE in 98, the Chainsaw Charlie shit, and would hang out there for a good portion of 98. And then he would be in WCW in 99 and 2000, I believe. Crazy, So it was a pretty incredible time and a pretty sad time that we went from that to having three companies that all gave us something different and all gave us something useful and meaningful to watch, to where it's all under one big umbrella now. And shit hasn't been the same since. That's for sure. Who was after Joseph? Joseph again. Thanks for two more from you. Sad that Triple H missed the entire invasion. Yeah, Triple H and Benoit would have made really good additions to that. I think so would have Lawler. I think his presence was missed in the invasion a little bit too. Even though he would have only been an announcer, we would have seen, probably different sides of him. And Triple H, I think, would have been firmly behind WWE, but I can see them moving Benoit back to WCW because they were really lacking the stars, like I said. So that's why you put Austin with them. And once you put Austin with them, it doesn't feel like an invasion anymore. It feels like just two clans of wrestlers are all WWE guys, and then Angle jumped, and I'm like, what are they doing? Angle's a babyface, and that big match against Austin, he got over as a babyface. Fans liked him as a babyface, and then they immediately turn him heel again, and then Austin's a babyface back by the end of the invasion. It was just all over the place. I mean, it was just so poorly done, and Triple H being there, I think would have been a little bit more solid of a rock that would have probably never faltered, but it would have made things interesting with Stephanie. And where would his alliance have been? He might have had to join the alliance and been with her, and then they have a breakup, and then he goes to WWE's side. It would have been weird having Triple H there. But I think Benoit and Triple H would have been on opposite sides, I feel like. Yeah, TNN became Spike after the Paramount Network deal and all of that. But the early days of TNN, I mean, they were the Nashville network. It was like this country bumpkin-ass station, and then they tried to change their image by having kind of becoming like a USA Network type of station, where they were doing more things other than just what they were known for. And somehow WWE struck a deal with them, leaving USA after all those years. And I remember not liking that. I just didn't like the network. It was weird to me, and they only lasted for a few years there and would go back to USA, I think in 2005, when they would return to where they should have never left, really. Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, I mean, had Dead Man's Corner, had Time Warner AOL not had it out for WCW, they would probably still be around. Yeah, I mean, all you got to do, I mean, just the company has to want the wrestling, because the thing is, you got to remember too, more than them just not really caring about wrestling. It was also like they were losing their shirt because they had all these contracts and the buy rates were down. Nobody cared. Business was so down, but they were just hemorrhaging money prior to this because of all the spending that had gone on and stuff. So they didn't wanted to stop the bleeding, I guess, and just end this. I mean, a lot of the same. It was a completely different situation because Turner didn't mind spending the money, but it was kind of the same thing when Crockett sold to Turner. It was because of, they were kind of overspending, and they reached a point of no return to where they really couldn't do anything but sell. Where, Ted was just kind of moving on with his business life, and wrestling was a casualty of that. So it would have been interesting had WCW remained in invested owners, people like a Tony Khan or something that wanted to keep the company and make it profitable, then yeah, I think they could have been around, because having a place for others to go is always good. Because it was right after that, right after Vince fired Jeff Jarrett live on air. Later on that year, the next year, he started TNA. So there was room for another company out there, and they tried to do that right away. So WCW might have suffered for a few years, and they might have gone through the shits. They might have kind of reverted back to what they used to be. To be honest, what they were in like the late 80s and the early 90s, the Bush League version of WWE, with a lot of their cast-off stars or legends that can't get booked anymore, or things like that, with a few stars sprinkled in, your big name guys. But for the most part, I think they would have been the minor leagues until something might have happened to where they could regain control again. Maybe they could start luring somebody, or maybe they could have gotten a Kane to come over under a different name, or a Rock, or somebody like that the stars align. I mean, let me think about this. What if they would have stayed in business around the time of Austin walking out in 2002? And then somehow he's able to figure out a way, like Kurt Angle did, to get out of his contract in 06 and then jump to TNA. What if Austin was able to do something like that and actually left and went to WCW? That's a crazy concept. Can't imagine that happening. But, then again, he might have said, I'm not coming. Vince, you might as well let me go, because I will never fucking set foot in your ring again. I hate you. I'm not coming back. Let me go. And then Vince maybe does, and then he goes, I don't know. Who knows what would happen? But their possibilities are endless when you think about what could have been. Trek, I missed the new TNN and Spike. They'd show Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and they weren't ashamed, so they took over where TNT got rid of all the good stuff. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Some people liked Scott Steiner. Yeah, that's why I was curious what you guys thought of that, because I was just never really a fan. But he was over. Like, people like, even back then, I saw Big Bad Booty Daddy. Maybe they just liked his language and he was such just a pervert and shit. I don't know, but it was like, I guess I could see why he was over with the male audience, but I didn't think he was that cool. Like, I thought like Rock and Austin were much cooler than him. I just didn't like, who fucking talks like that. Like, I just thought, I don't know, it was just too much for me. I just didn't like his persona, I guess. I didn't find it. I guess it's typical good pro wrestling persona to be that over the top, but I don't know. Something about it didn't click with me at all. Was never a fan, but I know I'm in the minority there. Yeah, and then Joseph Smith, in terms of the Nitro, it was mostly spring breakers, and that was another part a problem I had with it, is that it's kind of like those Road Wild pay-per-views or those Hog Wild pay-per-views. It was the same thing, just a bunch of fucking bikers. Even back in the day when WCW would run the shit at the MGM or whatever, it's like a ride. They would just bring people in, instruct them to clap and shit. It doesn't have that same energy or whatever. So sometimes WCW had a habit of doing that. Like, who would want non-wrestling fans at their wrestling show? That's what WCW did all the time. In WWE, when did they ever do that? Never. They want their fans there. So I think, had the just the venue and the atmosphere been different, the show might have had a little bit more of a, I don't know, more of a sentimental feel. When I look back at this last Nitro, I don't feel sentimental. I look back at a garbage show that was dark, that was depressing, that was not reminiscent at all of what WCW, what I had become, what we had all been known to expect from WCW. It didn't resemble any of that at all, and it was just this bad, ugly, gray, dark feel, and I just, just terrible. So, yeah, it wasn't really that fun going back to relive this, because it just got me thinking about how everything changed after this. So, pretty crazy. Anyway, I'll knock out a couple of final questions here, and then I'm going to get out of here, because we got SmackDown starting in about 15 minutes. Just want to make sure I don't miss any super chats. I know I got a couple of more down here. And another one from Joseph. Thank you for another Dialing 99 from you. This was before the internet boom. It was. Even then, well, by 01, I don't know what you're talking about now, but by then there was the website and stuff, but still. And there were dirt sheets now. Now news was more accessible by 01, but still not the lightning speed shit we'd expect from internet soon after. Dead Man's Corner. Thank you for the $5, man. Vince buying WCW is why wrestling is stagnant. No shit. WCW had a distinct feeling with its superior cruiserweight division and all those unique mid-carders WWF lacked. Yeah, I don't know, Dead Man's Corner, if you've been here since the beginning of the episode, but we talked a lot about that, or exactly about that very thing, in the beginning of the episode here, where we talked about how WCW really balanced the marquee of the NWO and all those big kind of maybe past their prime legends with just a tremendous undercard of some of the best talent in the world in those cruiserweight matches. getting that good wrestling was such a good balance to the main event shit. And that's why, WCW was kicking their ass for so long. And once you combine all that now and that feeling of competition is gone, it's literally never been the same. And a lot of people knew that. I remember a lot of wrestlers and people in internet and people in interviews and stuff were alluding to that, even at that time, even like right after the invasion, or right after the buyout, I should say, you'd watch a Shun interview. I remember seeing one with Bobby Heenan. I remember seeing one with Shawn. Maybe Eddie. Maybe no, not Eddie. Yeah, maybe Eddie Guerrero too, because he would be fired kind of in that little time span there. And a lot of other ones where people talked shortly after this had all happened, and they all said the same thing. They were all worried. It was just like, God, my one concern, they would all say, is that, if there's no competition, that could make the product suffer, because the wrestling got as hot as it got because of the competition. It was like that in the 80s when Vince was competing and tearing through everybody and acquiring all the stars and building Hulkamania. That was all born, that white hot time period was all born out of competition. Once he wiped everybody out, the 90s, if you remember, those early to mid 90s were kind of stagnant. Business declined, steroid trial, downsizing, everything had kind of changed in the company, and it was just really it was not what it resembled in the 80s. WWE felt Bush League. They ran tiny arenas. They taped a month of TVs at a time for 1 hour every week in front of 400 fans on Raw, and it just felt like shit. But WCW, because after he wiped out everybody and even, was instrumental in, making the Crockett's life difficult, they sold to Ted Turner, and WCW then decided just to start purchasing guys, and the balance started, then competition was created. Again, Vince hadn't had that since the days of the AWA and the NWA, so now he's got actual competition again, and what happened? He went full sling blade on these motherfuckers, just like he did in the 80s with all those territories, and built himself a huge company. And like he said in his promo, I beat a billionaire by becoming one himself. It's pretty much what he did. So, and he just wiped him out again. So every time there has been competition, wrestling has seen a huge surge. So wouldn't it be in everyone's benefit to hope for the best for AEW? Why fans are so divisive on this, it blows my mind. Every single fight, even if you hate AEW and their fans, you should be praying that they are successful. Because when there is competition, we all benefit. And to be willing to sacrifice your happiness as a wrestling fan just so you can stick it to the AEW cult fans on the other side is fucking stupid, and does not make you a wrestling fan at all. Makes you fucking stupid. We should all be hoping for the best for AEW, not trying to tear them down, not trying to discourage them, not trying to go so far out of your way to stick it to the fans that annoy you so much. Instead, let's hope for the best, because as we've seen, history has proven that competition creates amazing wrestling. So the better AEW gets, the more it's going to push WWE, the more they're going to push each other. And hopefully, after everybody's vaccinated and crowds return to the building, because everybody's, AEW's not doing much, man. We're in a pandemic right now. Let's get out of this. Let's put some people back in the arena. Let's see what they can do, really out on their own when life gets back to normal. And let's just hope for the best, because it really is our only chance to not be completely controlled by WWE in our lives. If we want to go there, because if AEW, there's not going to be another one that's really going to come along that's really going to have, we're all going to be dead by the time anybody really has a chance to compete. This is our best chance. So it seems, just advantageous for everybody to root for this chance of this happening, not to resist it, or to let personal feelings with what you see on wrestling Twitter get the better of your common sense. You know what I mean? So we need competition, and we need it bad. And history has proven that. Wrestling has not been very good since this night happened. So anyway, I think that's it. I'm going to get out of here. We got 13 minutes before SmackDown goes on the air, so I'm going to pull up a live stream of that, because my streaming app does not play SmackDown live for me. I'm on the West Coast. It's only 5 o'clock, so I got to wait until 8 o'clock to watch it. So I'm going to pull up a stream here on the computer. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. If you guys want to hang out and join me, we can do that, and then we will be up here live for the podcast tomorrow. Plan is to do 3 p.m., same time as we came up today. We'll be doing the podcast. We'll talk about pretty good Wednesday night shows. I thought both shows on Wednesday, Dynamite and NXT, were both really good. We got SmackDown tonight, a lot of WrestleMania chatter to discuss, plus the Peacock news, a few other tidbits of wrestling news. All of that will be discussed tomorrow on the Winged Eagle podcast. So you guys have a great rest of your Friday night. Enjoy SmackDown, and I'll be catching you tomorrow.